Welcome back to Energizing Bitcoin,
welcome
baby.
Back to Energizing Bitcoin.
I'm back. I wasn't here in episode 3.
Ooh, thank goodness.
Technical difficulties.
Back. Yeah, we can control the pace and won't be so boring to people.
Freddie was roasting you for the 7-hour podcast marathon you did last night.
Yeah, it was actually probably the shortest one out of
it actually was
3 we've done. So
we've already been here for an hour. So
I know.
Yeah,
we're probably recording the whole time, like behind the
Oh, we have been. That is going to be all the clips. All the promo clips are going to be us talking about what we were talking about, Max.
There you go.
Watch out.
Podcast brought to you by AA batteries.
Yeah. Got the microphone worked out. All right. So, we're at the Texas Blockchain Council convention again. And so that's why we're back on the casting couch.
Hey, it's been a good event, though. Let's give them a shout out, man. It's been a great attendance. I feel like really high signal. I think, particularly on the Bitcoin side, I think everybody's just as stoked as ever.
Well, it's a good time with the FTX stuff.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think that's going to be a catalyst to people understanding the difference of Bitcoin and everything else. Yeah. So I think it's probably good in the long run, but kind of sucks when you're going through it. But we got Andrew Burchwell he's the founder and CEO of the Ohio Blockchain Council. They just got going. I won't try to talk about it. I'll let you talk about it. And Max Serezhin with Standard Power, the founder and CEO. So he is a super sharp guy. I can't wait to talk to him and he's got a lot of energy too. So fired up, dude.
I'm super excited to be here. Man. Thanks so much, guys.
I'm excited. Two of my favorite people, man. I just met Max in Ohio.
The Amplify event.
Yeah. Right. Which we talk about that too.
I'm telling you, if we did anything, it's to convince people Columbus is a place to go, man.
I loved Columbus, actually, man. I had a blast.
I hated that I had to miss it, to be honest with you. I had so much FOMO.
It was fun. It was surprising. And I'm not trying to knock it, but I'd never been to Ohio. I've never been to Ohio at all.
It's a common misperception.
Right. It was fun. I had a good freaking time.
Are you in Ohio too?
So I'm from New York originally, but our operations are in Ohio.
Okay.
And so we've been preaching Ohio for so long, and everyone has this concept of Ohio as like this average plain state, but it's the complete opposite. It's actually a state that celebrates its diversity, and it's not flat. It's got rolling, beautiful hills.
Yeah, I love
the record.
Yeah. We shot our American Shale documentary out there with EQT, and that was my first exposure to that entire area. I loved it out there. I thought
it's
it was beautiful.
Awesome.
I don't remember who it was, but it was an athlete who was like, "Yeah, no, we don't have to." Oh, I think it was Burrow. That's what the image I had though when he was like, "Yeah, no, we don't have to worry about COVID. It doesn't change anything for us because nobody goes out and parties here anyway." So that's what I was expecting. But I had a good time in club. I was out till 3:30 in the morning. It was a good time.
Well, that's funny,
I was very responsible though.
he grew up next to the biggest party town in the States. That's funny that you said
really?
That. Yeah.
I think it was Burrow. I don't want to get it wrong, but
you're right.
I love Joe Burrow. So
he's a good ambassador for the state.
He is.
Andrew, I want to talk about obviously the genesis of the Ohio Blockchain Council, but also I'll be honest, I actually don't even know your background.
That's fair. Yeah. I keep that to myself. No. I was a geophysicist by training, right? So I was studying at Ohio State, and we were looking at kind of novel energy technologies like methane hydrates in offshore environments, right? So I started working for this company in Columbus, actually, that manages most of the national laboratories for the Department of Energy. So they were very involved in federal research, these commercializations based off of new energy research technology and development, right? So we were focused on carbon sequestration. That was a large thing, right? So for 20 years, we were studying what happens if you're trying to decarbonize in an energy industry that is going to always be throwing carbon into the atmosphere. What do you do with it, right? So before Elon was making bricks out of carbon, right, we were saying, well, let's just put it back in the ground, right, where we found it, right? So, my mentors were people who were really developing this idea to give to the Department of Energy to say, hey, let's spend money to study this more, right, back in the 90s. So we were basically one of the first groups in the country to take that carbon, sequester it back in the ground in a supercritical state in an order of millions of metric tons, right? So we were the first to do it, to really take it to the Exxons, to the Chevrons, to the Equinors of the world, and say, look, if you're trying to, let's say, live in this world of ESG, here's how you can do this. Here's how you can still make money. And now we have these carbon markets developing because of this technology. So I was a program manager for a 20-state consortium of researchers, universities, private industry, et cetera, to really say, look, let's just take a whole of industry approach. Let's use government funding. Let's use private funding. Let's figure out how to do this in earnest. And then let's take it to the market and say, let's scale it, right? So that was basically the impetus of how I developed in an energy environment. The energy is really what led me to Bitcoin. And we can get into why that is. I think it's
We will. That's actually really cool. I didn't know that either, man. Yeah. I knew you're a geologist. I didn't realize that though. That's a big deal now. So
everything's about the rocks.
And thinking back to the 90s, I did not realize that was something they were doing back then. So
that's the thing, and I think what we're learning and what we're trying to accomplish within this organization, with our mission for Bitcoin and within this industry, is how do we take these new concepts and get them in front of large stakeholders who maybe don't understand them, but can get the research-oriented apparatus of the federal bureaucracy, of the research institutions, of the universities, of private industry, and say, let's work together. Let's figure out what this really means, how we can really do something impactful for the world through this technology, right? So I'm very excited about that. I think, as with all things, we're learning as we come to these conferences, people from their individual perspectives, backgrounds, expertise are just coming to Bitcoin and saying, I'm here to help.
Yeah,
how can we work together, right? So I think it's the coolest thing. And totally agree. Texas Blockchain Council was the example. That's why we're here today, is let's learn from those that are doing this out in front first and best. And then we just want to take the model, go back to Ohio and say, look, guys, you don't know this is coming yet, but it's coming and we're here.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah, that is good. That's super cool.
Max, what's your background, man?
Oh, man. Varied background, but essentially I'm a developer. I'm out of New York City. We've either principally or co-developed over $2 billion worth of projects in the city. We have some cool skyscrapers. We have some cool projects in Soho on the Upper East Side. We also did a project in South Beach where we bought out an entire city street on 13th and West Ave and created this beautiful project there. So I was always involved in sort of larger scale projects, larger scale capital markets. And in parallel to that, I was working with Frontier Markets and doing energy development. So we did a big project with General Electric and the Russian government at the time, before the Russian sort of government became this really bad name. And of course, all super sad what's happened since then. And obviously all my thoughts and prayers go out to everyone affected by the horrible events. But essentially back then, before all that happened, we focused a lot on using natural gas as a way to bypass a very inefficient grid. And in that way, you could use some of these modular technologies, on-site generation, whether it be from the last kilometer of gas line or from a localized gas field, kind of like we're talking about now with this fracking concept. With the flare gas concept. So that led me to appreciate the grid, right? It led me to appreciate power scale and how big it is, because ultimately you don't need more than like 5-6 megawatts for like a humongous shopping center.
Yeah.
So when you really think about sort of like the scale of Bitcoin and thinking about like hundreds of megawatts, that's when I realized, when the first S9s came out, this is all going super industrial, right? They're not getting cuter and smaller; they're getting bigger and louder and meaner.
Yeah.
And these things, you're not putting them on a kitchen counter here. You're putting them not even in the garage anymore. You're putting them in another place altogether, and even putting them in a shed. You can hear, right? So ultimately, we realized that this is 2018 in the beginning, that this is all going industrial, and that's when we sort of started Standard Power, leveraging my background in real estate and power development, and ultimately, that background helped, because the kind of things we're doing now in terms of industrial redevelopment, it's so complex. There's so many layers to it. You need to draw on a very multidisciplinary sort of all the lawyers, engineers, like all the different people involved with the environment. It's a lot, and so that background's allowed me to do that. So here I am.
Well, and so look, I don't think enough people know in Texas, at least, about Standard Power, much about it. Like, do you mind giving an overview of like your operations and all, kind of what y'all do?
Yeah, absolutely. So Standard Power is a development company, and what we do is we redevelop industrial facilities that have been retired, and people don't know what to do with them. But the thing that they offer you is existing infrastructure, right? And not many communities want to have an additional substation or additional industrial facilities in a greenfield property, right? They're used to seeing a nice, beautiful field. Now you're going to tell them there's going to be this thing. Like, no, I don't think so. But if you come in and redevelop something that's already industrial, right, and something that's been applied to the community, they don't have any idea what to do with these things. But to you as a developer, as long as you have the vision to see it through, it gives you a low basis, right? And it gives you all the infrastructure that's there and a community that is welcoming you, because you're doing them a huge favor. You're taking away this plight, that's the source of crime and it's other things, and turning it around into a useful type of an enterprise. So for them, it's great. And that's why we thought, looking at that type of a business model made sense, as opposed to going out in greenfield or doing some other things to start, because we thought that was the way that we would make the most impact, but also from a business standpoint, find a way to make it the most economical.
Interesting. So going in and essentially retrofitting old school industrial stuff.
Well, demolishing them.
Oh, demolishing. Okay. Not retrofitting.
Not retrofitting. No.
Using the same footprint.
No, yeah, using the same footprint. That's sort of where some of that complexity is, because some of the old uses for these things, people say, oh, they used to create this many jobs. Yeah, but like an old paper mill, our first project in Coshocton, Ohio, also created a lot of nasty smell, right? A paper mill smells like sulfur. It's disgusting.
It's terrible, man.
Horrible.
You ever been to International Falls, Minnesota?
No.
Like crossing over to Canada. Dude, it freaking stinks.
So
bad.
Coshocton, Ohio was supposed to be the capital of Ohio at one point. It was under strong consideration. But those type of industries, it's hard to grow a city that has that natural restriction. And so people, and this paper mill's been around since before, they ended before slavery, and so these communities are so used to these assets being there as part of just their DNA, and it's so hard for them to think about, like, how do we change this? What else could this possibly be? And so when you come to them and say, look, you can actually redevelop this whole thing, and this thing that you thought was going to be a play can actually take you to the future. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome.
It's very unique. Like they are. Everybody's in the mining space, it feels like, was doing a lot of the same stuff, right? Everybody was just kind of, you raise money, you go find a spot out in the middle of nowhere, try to build this new facility, all these different things. They're one of the only groups I know of that is like looking for old, distressed, like specific things that are already existing and kind of refurbishing them into a Bitcoin mining facility.
Yeah. So you guys are actually building mining facilities itself. So not just like the power in the substation.
For sure, that's right. So
tell me your thesis, like let's go, Max.
So for us, basically the way we thought about it is, so if you're a miner, you have two decisions, right? Do you focus entirely on mining, or do you focus on infrastructure as well? And that all comes down to your risk reward of your capital base, right?
All this is where I think, sorry to jump in, but I told you I would, but of course. This is the difference to me of what, like, the existing miners and where the future of it would be, is that he's got it. And like guys like you get energy too, like the generation of it, but
more vertically integrated.
Right. And understanding, like, that's where your power is. And you have so many options that come off of that too.
That's right. Yeah. And owning your own self-gen is sort of a second level beyond this, but even just to connect to the grid and to have your own infrastructure, right? Because when you're talking about 50, 100 megawatts, you're no longer plugging this thing into the wall. You have a humongous facility. And if you think about, like, what is what is 50 megawatts in concept? It's not a huge amount of mining, sort of a nice level, but it's also an arc furnace for a humongous, steel mill, that's hundreds of acres. And so when you have these type of this scale of demand, you have a different stakeholder base. You have your interconnection agreements with your utility. That's, you're essentially deciding and how to optimize connections to entire cities, that level of scale. That involves so much community support, so much community development. So we figured, instead of sort of forcing it upon them, you start from the beginning and explain to the stakeholders what's going on, explain to them why this is awesome, explain from the very beginning. And then once you're opened up with the community support, then you can have as much scale as the lines can carry, essentially, right? As opposed to sort of forcing it upon them and saying, hey, listen, you have all the stuff that's going to be new, you have no idea what's going on, So we thought that this community first approach is important, but it also allows you to really focus on the redevelopment of the asset, because if you come into a community that's so small and you don't engage with them, they'll create permits out of thin air. You know what I'm saying? You'll just be stopped.
It's the same thing the oil and gas side.
That's right, exactly. So and that's the thing. So a lot of our investors actually from Texas are oil and gas guys, because they understand this community development approach. They understand the large capital asset approach. And for us, if you think about Bitcoin mining, it's very similar to data centers in the sense that it uses the same infrastructure, but it requires the absolute most efficient type of infrastructure and service. Otherwise, you're just not going to stay in the network. And where do you find that, right? You can't go into, like in Ohio, there's New Albany where Facebook and Google are, but land is very expensive there, right? But if you look at these industrial sites, they offer a perfect combination of economic upside for the miner as well as for the community as well, right? And so for us, we thought about all the different ways of, okay, do we do co-location? Do we do any of these things? And we ultimately realized that you have to own the asset. And with the asset comes all the environmental liability, right? And so you have to be very careful, but because there's all these risks inherent to it, the last thing you can have is community resistance. And being a developer from New York City, Let me tell you what community resistance means, and it means everything, right? Because then you're late on your interest payments, you're late on on all your investor requests and all this stuff. So ultimately, if you in an industry, especially that's such an immediate demand for immediate action, right? Because halvings come in and they wipe out half of your revenue, so you have to have as maximum mining as possible, also the cheapest way as possible. And so you need to have maximum efficiency, and to be able to find all of that, we realized that looking at these communities and taking an ownership position, but by taking an ownership position, taking a real stakeholder position, improving the schooling programs, talking to local authorities and saying, okay, how can we improve traffic flow? Whatever it takes, right? How can we think about, municipal heating systems that can combine into this sort of thing in every way? Because then you're no longer a mystery, right? Then you're no longer like, who is this? What is this phantom money they're talking about? You're just now a data center company that's focused on smaller cities as opposed to bigger cities, and that's it. And that allows people to sort of not be nervous about it and to hear out all the positives.
Yeah.
And so you get your low basis, you get your community support, right? And it's a nice.
I'd imagine one of the challenges that I've heard kind of from the community is that, especially when you're approaching investors, it's like, oh, we get either the Bitcoin mining side, we don't get the energy side, or it's like we get the energy side and we don't get the Bitcoin mining side.
Oh, listen, the investor community is total. I mean, listen, not only that, plus you have to wrap it up in cryptographic explanations of SHA-256 and what that means and why we need the power to begin with. Yeah. Right. So there are a lot of layers, and that's something we've been talking about, is that how do we educate people about the value of this? How do we explain cryptography that's simple to understand? Right. And it's sort of, you have to find a balance between how far do you go down the rabbit hole with people, and how far do you say, look, this is just the latest iteration of the latest technology, and this is the type of thing that essentially requires you to have a power use that is what it is. I personally think that the more we can explain the concepts, the difficult concepts to people, and the more we can find a way to explain really abstract concepts to people that are, your I don't want to say your average person, but the better it is for us. And I like to try to explain cryptography to people, and I like to try to explain that, you have, a certain minimum amount of power you need to draw, to be able to run processing. But those type of things and those type of education programs and those type of, that type of an approach, I think really ultimately helps.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
That, I'm sorry, go back, but the community stuff you're talking about, I'm at that, you guys are obviously helping a lot with that, with the blockchain council. And so I met you at Amplify. I've known you a while, Andrew, but I met you, Max, at Amplify, which was a great event. Why don't you talk about that a little bit, just kind of tell them what it was. And,
of course.
And you mentioned the Texas Blockchain Council. You've worked closely with Lee, I'm sure.
They are the example, right? Yeah. And that's, I think, as much as I'm an Ohio guy, I'm not going to be antagonistic. Texas is the start, it's the place to be. But I think, what Max was talking about really, which is the different levels of stakeholders in that community support. I think what I noticed right away, and we heard the mayor speak about this at Amplify, which thank you. I'm really thrilled that people were happy about the event and can't wait to do it again next year. Hope to see you there.
I'll be there next time.
You don't want to miss going out afterwards. It was a good time.
The community support really was what struck me. And the mayor telling the story about this, Madison Avenue, New York guy coming to small town rural Ohio and saying, hey, we want to build in your town. And I think, what was interesting to me was hearing him say that, we were skeptical, and it may be that necessarily the mayor doesn't understand cryptographically secure, hash algorithms and SHA-256, et cetera. He doesn't need to, just like I don't necessarily need to understand how email works to use it, right? What they said and what they did was we took a chance on something new in a legacy environment of manufacturing and industry that had been dispirited. This is what I noticed right away, and Max told this story really well, was that this was a population of people that once they lost the paper mill, which you talk about getting kicked while you're down, the paper mill, dirtied the groundwater, sunk up the town, and then it left. So they lost all the jobs, right? Right. So, when we were at this site visit, the ribbon cutting ceremony, and I spoke to a man that worked at that paper mill for 25 years. And he just wanted to see what it was. I know that man doesn't know Bitcoin. I know he doesn't understand what it is, but he came to the site to see it because he said, I'm just glad there's something here, right? So this to me was always a story of revitalizing a dispirited population and community of people. And I recognized pretty immediately, if that mayor was willing to take a chance on this industry, I know there are 100 other small towns all over the state that could do the same thing. And that's why I asked him at the event, what would you say to other mayors that might be, let's say, skeptical or not necessarily leaning into this? He said, just be willing to be surprised, take a chance on something, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
Which that goes back to what you guys were talking about in the car. Like, he mentioned, say that again if you can, because I'll screw it all up. But you're a conservative from New York that went and did a deal with a Democrat in
a very conservative county, right? So that's the thing, and that's so one of the things that we talked about, and Ted Cruz said that very nicely today, is ultimately one of the things that can unite us is this concept of, hey, despite of all of our differences, we're here for our families because we're here to support, create jobs, create wealth, right? And ultimately, what kind of family you want to have, that's up to you,
right.
But the fact that we're here to support that, and that's something that and what Andrew was talking about, when we came in to look at the site, we asked them, like, why didn't you make it into a special opportunity zone? Not that we care. We're not going to make a decision on it, but I don't know if anybody knows, special opportunity zones allow you to not pay any taxes as long as you sort of hold it for 10 years and over. So sort of perfect for this, right? And it was free. Essentially, any governor can go and apply for this thing, and there's no reason they would get rejected, basically. And I remember what they told me. He said, well, we didn't think anyone would pay attention. We didn't think anybody would care, so we didn't even bother. They said we had no hope, and that's it. And they didn't even do it. And that struck me like, can you believe how low people feel to not even try to do something free that could attract their salvation, And that's when I realized this is something way more powerful than just like, hey, let's find an efficient, environment.
Man, I honestly think that's the biggest area of education that needs to come, is not even just that, but like just there are some real moral cases even for Bitcoin mining and like humanitarian type issues for Bitcoin and Bitcoin mining. And it gets overlooked because of where we live. You know what I mean? We don't have to deal with the same problems that a lot of places deal with. And like electrical grids being very vulnerable. Ours is more vulnerable than we like to pretend, but you look in places, I refer to El Salvador a lot just because I go down there, but El Salvador and places like that, it's like what we're doing now will actually help prove up the case of what Bitcoin can do for the grid. And then you can outsource it to other places. And I know we're going to Marshall on at some point, talk about Africa, but that's a reality. It's all real stuff. And like bringing help for jobs and refurbishing things. Yeah.
Well, and it's resiliency within the grid, but I think, and I say this a lot to people, we talk a lot about banking being banked. And when we do that, we look outward and we say, well, what about Africa? What about Latin America, et cetera? What about rural Appalachia? We don't really talk about that or recognize it as much. I think this is where we as privileged individuals maybe lose the actual use case that's real right now, right? El Salvador understands this. People who were trying to take their wealth out of Ukraine when things got really messy, this is a use case that's useful right now. But when it comes to dispirited populations of people that don't have access to the things we have access to, now go to the Ohio River Valley right now and recognize the amount of people right now that could benefit from this right away. You just don't know about it. And this is part of the mission that we're trying to affect, is let's take the industrial use case of what we're building to talk about what comes after we build this, right? Because it isn't just they're using power, which is a tax revenue for the city. It's the city is now talking about how do we incorporate this technology into our day-to-day lives? How do we get this to be to the benefit of our population, right? So it's Coshocton, and then it's 100 other towns all over the Ohio River Valley that all you need is access to the internet, which we can do everywhere.
Yeah, we can do it everywhere now.
That's the thing. I mean, if you look at development economics, like one of the biggest problems is how do you develop rural communities, right? How do you develop these frontier markets? And, because they're not typically economic, right? And so, but this does that, right? And this is one of the best ways. And it's, one of the first things that happened when we came in, the lines got upgraded.
So, but that's a big deal.
That's a huge deal.
Like people ignore some of this stuff. It's like the biggest issue in Texas right now is we don't have enough transmission lines.
That's right.
We don't have enough we can get all the new generation.
Texas and everyone else.
Right. Yeah. I mean, everywhere it's a problem, but it's like we got all this new renewable projects coming online. We don't know how to get the power to the market.
That's right.
Because there's not enough transmission lines. So it's like, that's a big deal. Like that you guys come in and you provide a service, lines get upgraded.
That's right.
So that benefits everyone.
That's a huge thing. And, right now there's a whole new substation that they're thinking about increasing by a few hundred megawatts. Well, guess what? Forget about Bitcoin mining. It can attract pretty much anything.
Right.
The cool thing that's really exciting for me as a sort of a developer in large scale is that Bitcoin gives so much scale relative to other things.
Oh yeah, dude.
That you can plan a lot of communities around. Like people are trying to plan communities around geothermal. That's great. But you can definitely, if you incorporate Bitcoin mining into your general sort of facility of your city. You can have heat, you can have a power draw that enables you, like we talked about just now, to add grid resiliency. And ultimately, you create a sub-ecosystem also. I mean, if you think about it, these are tech jobs, but these are easy to get jobs, right? These are easy to train jobs. IT, basic electrical things. These are things that any community can generate. So you're not bringing a bunch of high-paid people from out of state. You're bringing in the people, and you're helping the local schools generate those people, and they can. And that's really the very exciting part, because it's the longevity of it, right? It's not some transient thing. It's a way for the community to really get excited, because now they have a reason to get excited.
Right.
And I feel like Chad's been like the greatest.
Oh, he's been
the greatest spokesperson for that, and going out to I forget the town where I was in Austin. Rockdale.
Riot's done a great, fantastic. They like are leading how we had a slight
engagement,
but of course what they've done is fantastic. And again, a lot of people gave them a lot of crap because of what happened. They bought Whinstone back then, and them and Marathon had totally different sort of strategies in terms of where you go. And I think the way that they're looking at it, very large scale sites, because you get that, the maximum sort of economies of scale, but then you also have maximum effect on the community. Because at that point, when you're investing so much infrastructure, and building a school doesn't become so overwhelmingly crazy as a proposal as if you're doing like a 5 megawatt site. You're not building anything at that point, what I'm saying?
Yeah, that's true. That is true.
And the word is ecosystem, right? And I think this is the right way to start thinking about this, right? Which is Brandon Quittem's Bitcoin is mycelium argument really lands with me, because what we're doing is we're seeding the ecosystem through this initiative. It's not just Bitcoin mining, it's what gets built around it and after it through this process, right? And so now we have these federal initiatives. The Department of Energy, through the Inflation Reduction Act, which of course is the most aptly named bill in the history of America.
Inflation Acceleration Act, some call it.
But they just put out an RFI for $1 billion to electrify rural communities, right? And they're looking for information about how can we do this most effectively. And I know that those people are not thinking Bitcoin.
Right. I was going to say, how much.
But to us, it was like ding, ding.
It makes the most sense in the world. So this is, I think, our mission. It's in what Chad and this guys at Riot do really well is tell a good story. Talk about how this isn't just about making a good business and building the biggest Bitcoin mine, but how do we redevelop a community, and then how do we do it over and over and over again?
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like you think about we have a hard enough time getting people to understand why Bitcoin has a value. And then you throw on it, getting them to understand Bitcoin mining actually has a value. And I think it actually has more of a direct value to people on their everyday lives, more immediate even than Bitcoin does.
For sure.
And,
that's the thing. I mean, the thing that people just have to remember is that the processing and the secure network is the value, right? Everything else is derivative of it. If we lived in a perfect world where nobody got hacked, everything was secured, we didn't need to trust anyone, it'd be great. Bitcoin would be valued at $0. You know what I'm saying? But sadly and unfortunately, we're in a world where we're so desensitized. How many people have gotten hacked? How many times they even report like, billion, person hack, like $1 billion hack. Nobody even cares anymore, because it's like, of course, I'm probably 10 of me out there somewhere. But that's why Bitcoin's so valuable, is because ultimately it's just information security. And for me, it's exciting because ultimately it comes down to the fact that each Bitcoin is 100 million Satoshis, and each Satoshi is a key value pair. And when you get into Lightning, there's another 1,000 sort of a division. But ultimately, a key value pair is just your secure bit of, your secure link of information that's cryptographically secured to the SHA-256.
Dude.
But the point is, but the point is that if you think about one of the coolest things about SHA-256 is that you can transfer 2.3 exabytes of data, right? And the point is, and it's like one of the perfect compression algorithms. And that's why the whole concept of Bitcoin is that, to mine it, you're using this power. Like, well, who cares? You're using the mathematically least amount of power possible, because you're creating the most efficient mechanism to store sort of in this probability cloud, right, of 2 to the 50, 256, and using this technology is incredible, right? And so I think all that combined is something that allows us to have all this efficiency. But
I told you, he's super smart.
Sorry,
get him going. Let him talk for the whole hour. We're
good. The other question I wanted to get was the shop at the paper mill. Like, what is the size? What are you producing? Tell us about the actual operation.
So it's 50 megawatts.
Yeah.
It's cool because we basically have the ability to act as a test site for all sorts of. So our next site is 700 megawatts. So on this first site, we have all sorts of different tech. We have like a Quonset hut style design. We have container design. We have containers with no, that you can stack. We have immersion cooling. And so it becomes sort of like a showpiece. And it's also part of the, the city. And so we're able to put together, a nice marketing package for the rest of it.
You guys do tours and all that
stuff?
Oh,
yeah. And a lot of people come to see it because essentially we've invested a lot of money into the way that, to make it top notch. Because for us, we figured, if we already have a low enough basis on the land side and on the infrastructure side, you can really have, sort of a showpiece. And that's sort of how we like to look at it because our investors are institutional, our clients are institutional. And so we think we've done a decent job of putting that site together. And now, of course, we're excited for the next stage, which is we're developing.
When do you think that'll be?
So we are already doing work. Conesville in Ohio is a 1.8 gigawatt former coal-fired power plant. And that's super exciting because we're able to show that you can take retired coal-fired power plants as an owner of the site and then make it more economic, like 2 to 3 years ahead of schedule, which allows you to accelerate coal-fired power plant retirement, which isn't such a bad thing,
Man, that's awesome.
So we're doing 50 megawatts of immersion there, starting in sometime in May, and then we're doing another 100 megawatts of hydro, the Bitmain's hydro.
Oh, you're using the Bitmain?
Yeah.
What do you think of those Watts miners?
So
M53s.
So it's interesting because right now it's all about how your price point is versus the infrastructure that it requires. Because the Watts miners and the Bitmain miners, they do require slightly different infrastructure.
The cooling racks and all that.
It's because the Watts miners are hotter sort of on the exit. But bottom line is, if you're looking at immersion, it's sort of a little different. And so with the hydro, it's just sort of single phase right within the miner, and then you use the water outside. But we're one of the few sites in the U.S. that actually can use the water technology, right? And it's one of those other super awesome things about Ohio is that the environment, right, is this incredible thing. Where there's not a lot of dust, not a lot of humidity. It's cool, and so so for us,
that's your way of talking shit on West Texas, isn't it, Max?
So listen. I gotta say, we come right at Texas because Texas is the standard, right? And so for us, I do like to compare Texas to like the Ferrari dealership that has that sells $50,000 Ferraris. It's all fine and well, except the parking lot's empty. There's like 30 gigawatts of demand you're saying here, and there's no way Texas is getting 30 gigawatts.
No, there's no way.
So, it's great, but, more, incentive for Texas to generate. But listen, Texas has done a fantastic job, right? And I think some of the things that it could use, like a capacity market for more grid stability, is one of the few things I think it could learn from PJM. But ultimately, it's done a great job. I mean, the full deregulation is awesome, and that's something we hope for sometime in Ohio.
Is the Blockchain Council going to help with that?
Oh, we are absolutely. It is on.
Come on, Andrew.
We are.
It is. And I think what gets lost in kind of this exuberance is that one of the largest Bitcoin mining facilities in the country is about to come to Ohio, for instance, right? So we get to tell that story. That story becomes a wedge for us to say, look, this is just the beginning of what's happening.
Yeah,
and then we get to say, hey, weather's a little better in Ohio. We've got groundwater in spades, right?
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, and really the story I've been trying to tell is Ohio has everything. I think Texas is out in front for so many reasons that it deserves to be and should be, right? But you get to West Texas, it's a different environment, right?
Yeah,
It's very different.
Water is not good out there at all.
So you talk about corrosiveness in the groundwater, all these other things that people don't really think about. And then all of a sudden, Ohio becomes the premier place to be doing this. And we know it. And this is, when Max and I first talked, I realized I thought I was bullish on Ohio.
Yeah.
This guy from New York really sold me on
But that's the
Ohio
thing. Like, you have to, when you take into consideration all these things, like, for example, fans on containers, right? Say air cooled. You can't not use fans here.
Yeah,
You're fucking using the fans, right? Fans are 3.5% to 7.5% of your utilization, depending on the efficiency of the fans. That's
a big deal.
That's an equivalent of mining. Then convert that back at about $1.50 per megawatt hour from your uptime per percent, and then you're back to like, holy shit, I'm not efficient at all.
Right.
That's
that's the stuff people don't think about. There's
think
little
about the
things
stuff,
like that. Like, especially look at now with the mining profitability where it's at. It's like, dude, 2%, 3%, 7%.
That's right.
Is that why you guys are looking at the immersion?
So, oh yeah, we love immersion. I mean, immersion essentially, like the biggest misconception about immersion is that it makes things more efficient. The only thing it doesn't. The only thing it makes more efficient is that your use of the mining box and your use of the container box, you just draw more power, you draw more compute from the same footprint, right? But your actual joules per terahash actually like go down a little bit. You know, up. They become less efficient.
Right?
So basically, they go. So basically, you know, it's great though because full immersion has no water use, right? Like so, or very little, much less, right? So like we focus, and there's two types of immersion. There's single phase and there's this two phase. So we focus with a company called Liquid Stack on two phase immersion, but really for data centers, not so much for mining because it's a little too, you know, for us. It's all about cost management, and two phases though now showing to be more resilient than single phase, with a lot of single phase systems sort of breaking a little bit now on people, which is pissing people off.
So you guys are doing mining, but also doing data centers, and I've heard that from multiple people. How do you make the decision of which one to do?
So anytime I have to decide really hard, I go for both, you know?
So you just mix them together?
So for us, the concept is the time of delivery, right? So for Bitcoin mining, you can put them into a site that's just starting to be developed and nobody couldn't give them shits, right?
Yeah.
But if you're not putting a nice data center with a nice campus that they expect into something that's like half a developed site, because or a demoed site. And so the cool thing is that you can make the sites economic by putting Bitcoin first, and then following up with a data center that has a longer lead time of marketing anyway, right? And so that's the thing. And for us, using immersion cooling for data centers is very cool because if you look at data centers traditionally, they're really complex, but they're really complex because of the air management. And they're structurally complex because you have to put heavy-ass HVACs on the roof. But when you get rid of that all with immersion, you really sort of simplify the building. And so you have this really cool way of sort of, you know, going into the future, but in a very efficient way that's much more profitable. And so you do want to combine both because ultimately traditional data centers, they're restricted by how much absorption there is in the market, right? Like you can't just plug in a data center, just mince money if you're like Bitcoin. Shit's impossible, you know? But for data centers, depending on if you have that absorption, it is a really good balance because you're doing like $5 to $10 million a megawatt as opposed to for Bitcoin facilities without the miners. You know, it's about like 500,000 or something.
Wow.
So correct me if I'm wrong.
Right. That's a big difference.
That's different, but it's a different pay profile, different client profile. You know, you're not, you know, it's a whole different thing, right? Totally diversified thing, but utilizing the same exact infrastructure. And we like Ohio again for one of the reasons is that there's a lot of places you can, but fiber, right? And latency is so key. And so for us, you know, the corridor between Columbus and Pittsburgh with the dark fiber route and being there is also such a benefit because then we become an operation that is multidimensional. And to the community, that's also great because they then see like, okay, they're definitely not one trick pony, right? All this stuff happening. Right. And that's when you get the jobs multiplier to really sort of kick in.
So on the Bitcoin mining side, it's, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's safe to say that the immersion setups is significantly more CapEx, much longer payback on Bitcoin mining, but on the data center side, it's significantly cheaper than having the massive HVACs on. Okay,
that's right.
When you look at it from an efficiency standpoint, probably.
Yeah,
right?
and I mean these things are also. I mean the PUEs on this thing are like 1.03, like data center.
Yeah,
I mean it's a wrap. So that's the thing.
But your capex is more on the immersion, right? Yeah. But
relative,
it's come down a lot though.
Of course it has. Of course, and it will continue to, right? As things become more standardized, et cetera. Right now things are still sort of bespoke a little bit, right?
Right.
And so, but we think that if you understand the systems now, you'll be the leading understander of the systems later.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
When did you guys operations first kick off?
So we started in 2018. We bought, and then we got MGTI and Blockchain K2 in early to mid 2019. So we had to we agreed to part ways with MGTI at the time because they had a McAfee as their main backer. So that was like, that wasn't, at first they're like, wow, this is great press. They were like, oh no, this is terrible press.
Crazy. The Netflix documentary comes out.
Or like, sorry fellas, we gotta go. But then Blockchain K2 we did a deal with, and then we self-mined, 200 miners, who gives a shit though. Got us to do our systems. And so that forced us to have all of our own systems underwritten, to do all our own systems. And so we've been mining, sort of tiny bit for self just to make sure we have it. And then that's allowed us to sort of grow. We had a huge deal we signed with Cypher for 200 megawatts. And then Bitfury sort of let Cypher down. Then that whole, so our current site is actually, it was originally designed for Cypher, and then we sort of had to change it around. Cypher ultimately had to obviously choose to support the site that they had ownership in here in Texas. So.
Yeah. So what's the next things for Ohio Blockchain Council? Like, what are you doing right now?
Yeah, right now, what we're trying to do is build the organizational capacity to really move at scale in 2023. And I think this is my mission coming into this was let's take the lessons learned from Texas and let's grow a little faster, but not too fast to be able to really come to fruition as these industries are being developed in tandem within the state, right? So we have a tremendous base of foundational partners and support, and we're very lucky in that way, I think, because Ohio, for whatever reason, was an existing enterprise state that was just keeping to itself. So we've built the apparatus. We're working directly with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce to start making this a legitimate industry within the state very quickly. And so I think one of the things we've been talking about with Standard and some other partners is how do we institutionalize this idea in a way that really speaks to people who are maybe non-traditional stakeholders like the legislator, right? So peer-reviewed research. How do we really show, hey, this is a grid resiliency and economic development play, and maybe you just didn't realize? And how do we take that to the APs of the world and say, this is to your benefit, right? So I've been doing a lot of work trying to get Ohio State, because of course, as a Buckeye, I'm going to do what I have to do to get them involved to say, let's find the researchers who are at least adjacent to blockchain, to Bitcoin, whatever it is, from the finance department, from the engineering department, from public policy, for instance. Say, let's convene a study. Let's really look at this and let's put something on paper that we can then take to people and say, this isn't just some fly-by-night idea. This is a legitimate enterprise. This is something that's going to be to the benefit of the whole state. And we need to start moving faster, right? So then we take university research and we start applying that to funding mechanisms, whether it's from the state, the federal government. And then all of a sudden, it's not just Standard Power building their own things. It's the government itself saying, look, we want to be a part of this and let's figure out how. So I think one of the things I'm kind of keeping close, but really would like to work on is how do we take what Fort Worth did, take a city within the state and make them a Bitcoin miner of sorts, right? And I think it's really great that, again, Texas gets to say it's first. You know what I mean? But at the same time, I'll rub elbows a little bit with them. There's 3 S9s, right?
Well,
so let's do it a little bigger and better.
I wasn't going to throw them under the bus, but you did. So that's cool.
Again,
we can do it a little bit bigger.
Yeah, do it a little bit. You do it a little bit.
4 S9s.
Yeah, we're going to get 4 S9s out there.
You can get a real.
You know what? We're going to get 45 terahash.
I'm really proud of this. No disrespect to Fort Worth, because I think they took a chance on something. And again, this is something where how do we find those stakeholders who want to take a chance on this and say, all right, well, now's the time. It may be that this industry is sort of a dark cloud over it because of all these other things, but actually, like you said, this is the moment to talk about why Bitcoin. This is the moment to talk about why self-custody. This is the moment for us to really say, look, this is inevitable. It's here to stay. And if you're not leaning in now, you're going to be behind, right? So that's my mission for 2023 is really to organize, throw another great event like Amplify in the fall, and really try to showcase why Ohio is.
You're going to wait till the fall?
Well, look,
do it in the spring, man.
Yeah, well,
don't wait till the
I don't
fall.
want to overshadow Empower again. I'm not trying to.
Man, you never overshadow Empower. You know what I mean?
No, and by the way, shout out to Digital Wildcatters for helping us out.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Awesome. You guys did a great job.
Yeah, we tremendously thankful for your support and the fact that we can do that together.
Listen, let me tell y'all something that, it's on the podcast, I guess everybody's going to hear it. But listen, Empower started off as a backyard barbecue, literally at our office.
That's awesome.
And then through people like you and through Mario and through Justin and through just the rest of this community, it was like there was so much hype, and we're like, we can't do this as a backyard barbecue. This has got to be like, we've got to find a venue that can house this many people. And it was like introduction after introduction after introduction. So I say that to say that we've just been like the platform and just facilitated it, but it's really a testament to the community that has wanted it, and there's so much demand, and just thankful that everybody rallied behind us and made that a good event last year, and hopefully even more amazing next year.
No, it's gonna be sick, man.
Well, awesome. and like we were talking about the other day, I think what happened there, what's happening here, what we're trying to develop in Ohio is an organic process of people with their own self-interest showing up and helping, right? So my whole thing is it can't just be me building this organization, and we have tremendous support from our backers, but this is an organic industry that we're all just showing up to and saying, all right, I'm here. I've got this skill. Let's see what we can do.
Has the membership been grown a lot?
Absolutely. Really? Every week I get a new call from somebody that says, like, I don't quite know what you guys are doing, but I know this is coming and we want to be a part of it, right? So, and again, why we wanted to work with the Ohio Chamber of Commerce was to say, look, we may be something that you don't understand, but we've got traditional stakeholders who are ready to lean in quick. So my whole idea about what's coming is that Ohio, Texas is always going to be Texas. It's not really a swing state. People talk about, it's going to turn, purple. It's I don't think it's going to. But at the end of the day, it's it's going to be what it's going to be. Ohio is the pivot state in a general election cycle. And if we're able to make Ohio a Bitcoin state within the next 2 years, and if Bitcoin is of, national prominence and attention coming into a major election cycle, then all of a sudden we're at the position where we get to champion Bitcoin mining as an industry and say, we're doing this for these reasons, it's the right reasons. And, not just this is the place to do it, but this is the country to do it. This is the industry that's going to move the world forward. And all of a sudden we've turned the tide, I think, in terms of the narrative.
Right. And helping it not be such a political issue. We don't want it to be a political party, platform issue for one party versus the other.
If anything, we need the Bitcoin party.
Right. Honestly, man.
What we've been talking about today is that it actually is a uniting factor, right? And what you were saying is that, I'm a conservative from New York, but I came to a conservative area and was able to work just fine with a Democratic mayor, in Coshocton, and it never came up.
Yeah.
Never. It doesn't, because when you're aligned on purpose, on progress and helping the kids have a better future, stuff doesn't matter, it falls away.
Well, man, I'll be honest, and I know this might not sound great, maybe it gets edited out, but I don't like the federal side of it being the focal point of the talking points, because the reality is the states matter and the localities matter.
And that's 100%.
And that's the reality for so many things in politics, is that we're so caught up in worrying about who the president is, who this is. Right. Man, go vote so you can take care of this city.
That's right.
More power to the states.
Right.
And this is the thing.
They impact you on a daily basis.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean?
That's the whole point of the states. I mean, you should move wherever you want freely within the United States to live in a place where you agree with them.
Yeah. So it's that's where we need it to be, and it's good to know that places like Ohio and what's that mayor's name? He was solid.
Mark Mills.
Mark Mills. Yeah, he's awesome. He's amazing.
Right. Well, and I do think this is the era of the governors. And I think, we sort of went too heavy federalized. And I think that's coming back to the states a little bit.
And it annoys the shit out of me.
Well, it should, right? Because I think things are inefficient when they're centralized. And this is Bitcoin in a nutshell, right? We're in the effort of decentralizing power structures such that we all have a little more say in our day-to-day, whether it's from a money perspective, whether it's from a rules perspective. So having an executive leadership team in Ohio that, they may not necessarily be forward-facing about Bitcoin, but we got the lieutenant governor to come to a ribbon cutting for a Bitcoin mining facility in Ohio on a week's notice, right? I mean, that really, to me, spoke to how they're looking at this and throwing in, right? Yeah. So if I'm encouraged by anything, it's that we at least have a state jurisdiction from a policy perspective, from a legislative perspective, right? They passed a pro-crypto bill, I think is how they phrased it, right? It's neither here nor there.
We'll fix them one of these days.
By the way, about the first, Ohio was the first to pass a law that you can pay the business taxes on a bunch of them, like 39 or something.
In Bitcoin?
Yeah, actually, the partner website, it ended up shutting down because there was so little use, which is so stupid. But the point is that the state initiative was there, and that's when we were actually raising money back then. We were saying, look, our state is fine. I don't know about New York, but these guys are good. And that was so important to us, because ultimately you have to commit so much capital.
You're right, man. That helps investors get over a hurdle 100%. Because the biggest hurdle they have every time I talk to investors is what's going to happen. I don't know how this is going to get treated. And if the state is signaling by passing legislation like that, it's like that. How much better of a signal can you get?
And that's the thing when we're talking about this is a big asset test for states, because this is like manna from digital heaven. It's money out of nowhere to change everything, only if you welcome it.
Manna out of digital heaven, dude. Hey, there's gonna have to be Adam Power. That's the headline of manna out of digital heaven. I
feel like that's like an activation that you make of just Bitcoin just falling from the sky.
Yeah, I'm making a meme for that, man. That's a good one.
Well, and we actually got that message not in those literal words. I would love to do that.
Actually, I'm going to start an entity with that,
man. I've got the website down. Dang it. We had the lieutenant governor speaking at this ribbon cutting, and I think Dennis Porter, shout out to Dennis for coming out, by the way, because I think he's a tremendous champion.
He's done a great job,
Yep.
But he was in his ear beforehand, and then the lieutenant governor gets up there and he's giving his spiel, and he's saying, look, this was a town that used to be a paper mill that used to print money. And now we're putting Bitcoin mining facilities into here that are also printing digital money, and it's something we're thinking about, right? Yeah. So
that's cool, man.
Heaven. I think this is a concept they can grasp quickly if we show up, if we talk to them, right? If the right people are in their ears saying, it's Bitcoin, not blockchain. It's Bitcoin, not crypto, right? All these things which we get our foot in the door with blockchain. A lot of people give us a little grief about this. Why didn't you call it the Bitcoin Council? And I get it. I'm on board. I'm a maximalist. I'm the same way. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of people that aren't going to come to the table unless we use, semantics that they're a little more comfortable with. And then we use that opportunity to tell them why Bitcoin. That's right. Exactly.
Plus, Bitcoin is blockchain. So, everything else is also blockchain.
Yeah. Thank you, Max. I agree with it. That is true. And that stuff will come. I don't like the infighting that there is sometimes because of semantics, but it's all about the messaging and what you're trying to do for the industry. And that, like, Lee has been a proponent for Bitcoin mining in Texas, has done a great job, and
fantastic.
You guys are doing it as well. So I don't care if you called yourself freaking, I don't know, whatever, but it doesn't matter. Ohio's just manna from heaven. So it's good. You know what I mean? As long as you're advocating for the health of the industry and moving things forward properly, and make sure, like I've said it a lot, we're going to get regulation. There's just no way around it. You're going to get it. FTX has really ensured that. You know what I mean? That's going to come. But we need people like you guys to advocate and educate to make sure we get reasonable, rational regulation. And
that's right.
If we don't, then that's how you end up with the irrational regulation that kills the industry.
That's right. And regulation isn't a bad thing necessarily. You know what I'm saying? Like,
it'll help with adoption and investment.
That's the point. Like, a lot of institutions are on the sidelines because they're like, we don't know. Like, I can't invest $20 billion into something I have no regulatory sight.
What's going to happen to my investment?
That's right. Like, and when you don't have, when you don't have a framework to even think about it with your legal team, like, you just won't do it. You know? And so ultimately, it's exactly what you said. It's about guiding and educating the legislators. That's what we're doing. It's just everything we can. And Dennis, and we're working closely with him too, in the sense that this isn't something you need to be afraid of. This is something you need to understand. And these are forces that you can direct for the good of your community.
Right.
So shout out to Ted Cruz, because at Empower, we were talking with his team, and they were like, he'll come. He has one request, and I was like, cool. What is it? He was like, can you put together 20 to 25 of the top miners that are going to be there in Empower for a nice little session the next morning over breakfast? And so we had about 3.5 hours, and he comes in, his whole team's in there, and we've got everybody kind of represented. We all go around the room, talk about what we're doing, what we're working on and stuff. And he's just sitting there the entire time, just taking notes, and had really, really good questions, really thoughtful questions. The team chimed in with a lot of different things. And so to me, it seemed very genuine that he was truly trying to understand this space. He was asking, how do we regulate this? His wife was chiming in and stuff. So
he was great today. He explained Bitcoin mining, like all the benefits, point generation for for renewables. He was great. So you could see that he really did, make an effort to understand it and seize the benefit.
And I do agree. I agree with that. And I think from the past year, even like in January, there was a House hearing on cryptocurrencies and energy use and all that. And it was more of an educational type hearing. Do you remember it? It was late January. Well, I did have a chance to visit with a lot of the congressional offices about kind of questions and things like that. And man, I'm not gonna lie, like they didn't know anything. Like it was green, real green. Where it's at now, though, I've already seen a dramatic education uplift on like
that's great.
The staffers.
Right.
You know what I mean? And they're ultimately...
Those are the keys, right? Yeah, of course.
Right.
The guys, these bills, they're like 10,000 pages. No one's reading them.
No one's reading it. Yeah, no one's reading that stuff. None of them are. I don't care what they say.
No way.
But yeah, like the staffer level is really improved from an education standpoint. So
that's great.
That does have a lot to do with like you guys and Lee and those folks getting in there and making sure that they're working with those people. And yeah, I know there's different crowds in the Bitcoin world that want you to, not visit with politicians, whatever. And it's a fine line. Nothing's ever black and white.
Yeah, the politicians represent you. Right. You know what I'm saying? Like if you want them to represent someone not in your interest, then that's your fault.
Right. And that goes back to even the constituencies we got to keep educating because they vote on these people.
That's right.
We still have people that are asking where are the pickaxes.
Right.
We've got a long way to go.
Yeah, we do.
But we've committed to doing a quarterly update. On our end with the legislators, doing an annual update. Then we're looking forward to it. We're working very closely with with other organizations, and that's the point. Like what we see is in Ohio is this interesting dynamic between sort of the Ohio Manufacturers Association that represents the people that use the power, and the Chamber of Commerce that represents all business, right? So ultimately also the utility. And so we become, and the Bitcoin miners become a nice pivot to bring it all together and to say, okay, this is how we can make us all work, right? And so I think what we're trying to do and what was happening in Texas, but what I think everyone else around the country should do is to have these regular meetings, right? With all the councils that they're having at their local state levels to really explain it, because again, it is just about getting in front of them. And the concepts, ultimately, when you say it enough times, like you're like, oh, wow, I can explain cryptography pretty quickly. You know? You will get it, you know, and people will get it also. It's just about putting the work in. And that's just really what it comes down to.
Well, shameless plug for us doing this. I mean, this is the entire point, right? It's education. Content is the highest form of leverage in this generation. And so obviously I love what we're doing, but it's not just up, like everything is so decentralized these days. We all have phones. We all have the ability to have social media.
That's right.
And it's up to us to tell these stories. And I've gone on stage multiple times and talked shit to the oil and gas industry. And I said, listen, y'all looked, I was like, it's you guys, you the gray hairs, you look to the Exxons and the Chevrons and the APIs to take control and like put up, content and have this narrative. And it didn't work, and look where we're at now. And I was like, so make up for it. What are you doing now? You have a cell phone, you have TikTok, you have Instagram, you got LinkedIn, put up the content and tell those stories. And so it's up to all of us.
Speaking of TikTok, I give a plug for my boy Mardo Tochez at the El Salvador embassy. That dude, he's like becoming a TikTok star. Nice. He's getting all. I think he's got like 200,000 followers now or something.
He's got the dance down?
Yeah. He told me he hasn't danced yet.
So wow, he's famous without the dance.
Without that. What a guy.
Serious business.
That's some serious stuff. So.
Well, and I knew we needed a meme budget right away, right? This is the game, right? This is the economy we're in. We need to tell stories, but we need to tell them effectively. We need to be clever. We need to be out in front of, I think, a younger generation, right?
Absolutely.
Who are going to be the staffers that we're going to be as congresspeople? It's going to be the younger generation just graduating, right? So reaching them through stories, through experience, right? You guys do a great job of throwing events that people want to go to. And I think I saw this on Twitter and you put it on your promo. Like, I don't think I want to go to another energy conference not thrown by digital. Right? Like,
they're boring, man.
Good job, man.
A lot of people don't, like, if you're not in it and you're just like freshly exposed to it, you kind of like don't get it. But once I sit down, particularly like with, now that we're working with some of the largest brands in the world, and you sit down and they understand kind of the why behind it. And it's like, you put yourself in the shoes of somebody, let's just talk about the oil and gas side in particular, who's like maybe been indoctrinated to hate oil and gas, and it's been demonized their entire life. And maybe they Google some of this stuff. And we hope that our content comes up and it's stories of people who are working in the industry, doing really, really hard work, solving some of the world's biggest challenges, the energy issues that we have today. And they're like, man, not only does that look like cool, but it looks fun. Like, I actually want to go do that. Like one of the biggest challenges that we have is just attracting talent. That's not just specific to oil and gas, but that's energy really as a whole. Like, everybody wants to go to tech, everybody wants to go work at Facebook and Instagram and things like this. But this is one of the most rewarding industries that you can possibly be in.
And high paying. It's a good paying industry.
People forget that the original sort of the groups that invested first into the semiconductor chips and all that were energy groups, right? They were the first groups that, even before all of the sort of the forward future seeing tech people, it's always the energy companies because and the energy sort of families, or because ultimately they have to look at the most efficient technology, right, in large scale, and they have to invest into some of these things that require risk that otherwise is very hard to gauge, right? So a lot of the oil and gas companies right now, like you're saying, really do have this opportunity where instead of sort of saying, okay, we're not going to use energy anymore, not going to be energy companies, let's direct it, right? Let's use it for the proper use that it was supposed to be. And using Bitcoin is one of those amazing things that they have this tool to completely reverse their image by saying we can use this effectively, our resources.
Yeah, man. Freaking love Bitcoin, man. It's good stuff.
That's what I love. I mean, the underlying common denominator, I think, for me with both, energy and on the Bitcoin mining side is it's the story of prosperity.
Right.
And how it can completely change lives. And so for me, zooming out macro, it's like I kind of have a hard time thinking about a chapter after digital wildcatters because I'm like, this is the most important two things in the world that I should be focused on. Obviously it didn't start that way. We were just trying to have fun and do podcasts.
That's the best way. Those are the best way.
That's exactly
how the best things are started.
Of
course.
When you're starting just to have fun and do something that turns into something special and cool and
that's it.
And impactful, like that's awesome, man. How lucky is Dude, I feel so lucky, and I'm not even getting to do some of the same stuff you do. And I'm like, man, this is just great. Like, we've all of us here, honestly, have like made our own jobs and careers, and it's kind of cool and weird. And
weirdest.
just life
All
is
those things are, right?
life in the
Life,
universe
man.
is
Definitely
just
weird.
wild, man. Like the stuff that happens, I'm just like just roll with it.
Manifest.
Like
Digital.
man. I'm gonna say that all the time.
It's
now, man.
awesome, man. I love it.
It's cool. Well, I don't know, man. I mean, I don't have anything else to ask, but you guys want to go get some food?
Yeah, let's go get some dinner.
Let's go get some food. I gotta make the speech for Dennis also to announce some of those gifts.
Oh,
All
yeah.
right, let's-
I know.
Yeah, nice.
He's gonna yell at me.
Well, yeah, we better get out of here then. But,
All right, let's
well,
get out of here. We'll catch you guys in the next
Awesome,
episode.
Yep,
Yeah,
next
thank you so
episode.
much for having us here. It was super awesome.
Yeah,
Thanks again.
Thanks, man.
Had a blast.
Have fun.